2, 3, 4.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Power of Music Thinking. My name is Christoph Zirn, and this is the podcast for people with a musical heart and a wicked job. We're looking for stories, insights and tools from the big world of music to inspire leaders and followers to listen, tune, play and perform in whatever field you're operating. The fun of podcasting is the freedom of the medium. You can talk with fantastic people all over the world and make special episodes that dive into a theme, idea, or matter. In the last episode, I shared with you audio postcards as an alternative to taking pictures and videos. Check it out if you like to dive into the first snippets of audio postcards from Japan. But besides the specials, and you can expect more on the sounds of Japan in future special episodes, I have conversations with interesting people that have a close connection with sound, listening, and music thinking. I already recorded 3 beautiful conversations and more are scheduled. So from sound, UX and cello to coaching and opera singing and sonic investigations in communities. But before we dive in, a quick note that this podcast is a passion project. If you enjoy these conversations, you can support the show by buying me a virtual coffee at ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi/music thinking. It helps cover the costs and is hugely appreciated. So, today we are heading to Hoboken, New Jersey to speak with Chris Dalla Riva, who works at the fascinating intersection of music and data. He's a senior product manager at the streaming service Audiomack and the writer behind the popular newsletter Can't Get Much Higher. His work has been featured by the Economist and NPR, and you might know him as the guy who set off an internet-wide debate about the decline of key changes in popular music. In our conversation today, we get into some incredible territory. We'll discuss his research into the Billboard charts that reveals, for example, the surprising moment black artists began to dominate popular music. And we'll also find out how his company Audiomack is beating giants like Spotify across Africa with one simple but crucial feature. And we'll hear about the book that came from his personal quest to analyze every single Billboard #1 hit since 1958. It's a fantastic conversation, so let's get into it. Welcome, Chris. Welcome to the Power of Music Thinking.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
What was your first or most memorable sonic experience that had an impact on you?
I mean, there are certainly a bunch of them. I feel like when people get a question like this, they immediately go back to, the most powerful musical experiences from when they were young. And oddly, I had a very, 1990s, 2000s first experience with music where one of my first favorite songs was TNT by the band AC/DC. And the way I heard that, my dad's a big AC/DC fan, but if my memory serves me correctly, the way I heard this song is that it was in a Tony Hawk video game, which these games had great soundtracks, and they definitely exposed a generation of kids to a lot of great hard rock and punk music. But I became sort of obsessed with this song from the game, and from there I wanted to learn more about AC/DC and more about all that classic rock music. So it was quite the jumping off point. I still love AC/DC to this day, even though I'm not as much of a hard rocker as you would think I would be if that was one of my first musical loves. But, Angus Young, I still think is one of the greatest guitar players that's ever lived.
Yeah. And all the power from, if you like it or not, but you really can't say it doesn't have any power. It's like a TNT, it's dynamite or something like this. So.
Yeah, no, AC/DC, I mean, lyrically and structurally, the songs are pretty much all the same. They've got bumper sticker choruses. If you know the title of the song, you probably already know the chorus. But they had some tight songwriting too. I mean, something like "You Shook Me All Night Long." Of course, it's played with distorted electric guitars, but to me, that's great pop songwriting, and there's a reason that they've sold more records than almost anybody else.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself. So, what do you do for a living, and what's your link with with music besides your first encounter in a video game?
So I work in the music industry. I work for a music streaming service called Audiomack. Audiomack's more in the vein of SoundCloud in that users can upload directly to the platform, and it's tremendously popular in Africa and the Caribbean. And many African nations, especially in West Africa, we're the most popular streaming service around. I work on data and personalization there. So, data would involve making sure people internally have the information they need to do their jobs, what's trending on the platform, which playlists are performing well. Externally, we also want to surface those statistics to our artists and make sure they can see where is my music being played, who is listening to it, so on and so forth. And the personalization piece is, algorithmic suggestions that you see across music streaming platforms these days. If you're a Spotify user, you could think Discover Weekly, but various sections that are like songs for you, playlists for you, albums for you. We try to build out that stuff and make it complement our human curation. So that's my day job. I do a lot of writing about music outside of that job. I have a pretty popular newsletter called Can't Get Much Higher, where I write about, not shocking, music and data, which usually just means I'm writing about whatever musical topic piques my interest. But there's probably a chart somewhere in there that I think illuminates the trend. And I also play music. I write songs. I play in bands. That's probably my first musical love. And I still continue to do that, even though I've had more success writing about music than making it. But ultimately, it comes back to the same thing that motivated me when I was 12 years old. It's just, there's something very moving about sounds when they're organized in a certain way.
Absolutely. That's very nice said. Organized sound. I think many composers think about organized sound and silence. Talking about music. But what kind of music are you playing?
The music I make is in the indie rock, indie pop sphere. I play now occasionally in a cover band that does a lot of 60s, 70s covers. And I play with my cousin's band a lot, who is more in the punk universe, which I play the bass in that band. It's not music that I would have gone out of my way to make, but I've really come to enjoy it, and it's changed my sensibilities about music a little. And it's sort of, you're talking about AC/DC, there's that power to the music. Some of the music I play with him has a similar feel. And I've gotten to play the bass a lot more and really enjoy the instrument than I did previously when I'd only played the guitar.
Yeah, that's funny. It's a different position, literally, in the band, but it's also a different position in the way how you influence the music. So most of the time, you're not the front man. Instead of, if you're not Sting or any other bass player. Yeah. Or McCartney, for example, but the bass and the drum, they go together and make the fundament often. Do you see it the same?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially in punk music, I mean, the bass and the drums hold down the rhythm section. Usually in those groups, you're usually playing in a 3-piece or a 4-piece. So the bass and the drums are very, very important to that sound. And of course, if you play the guitar, the bass isn't that much different. It's the bottom 4 strings of the guitar just tuned down, I believe, an octave lower. Yeah. But still, you have to learn that the instrument has a different sensibility, even though where all the notes are, the positions are all the same as playing on the guitar, but it's a completely different feel that you have to get used to, which I've really come to enjoy.
Can we cycle back just to Audiomack? I think that's interesting because SoundCloud or Bandcamp, I never heard about Audiomack. But your explanation, it's very popular in Africa, and I think that's super interesting. So, do you think it works there differently? Is there also music on Audiomack that maybe is not on Bandcamp or not on Spotify? So can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, totally. There is definitely some music we have that other platforms don't because you can upload directly to the platform. So, like SoundCloud, if you put something on SoundCloud and choose not to upload it anywhere else, it's only going to be available there. But the reason Audiomack became very popular in Africa is we have offline downloading on our ad-supported tier, which
Hmm.
means you can come on, you can download a set number of songs offline and listen without Wi-Fi. And many places in Africa, there's bad data plans, there's not
Yeah.
great Wi-Fi. So offline listening is very, very important. But most platforms put offline listening behind their paywall. So we were
Mhm.
able to build a huge audience there by allowing our ad-supported listeners to take music offline.
Hmm.
And through that, we established a dominant position in many of these countries. Additionally, we have curators based in all these countries, and I think we're more tapped into the local scenes than, say, Spotify or some of your bigger streamers are, even though, Spotify or Apple might be available in these countries, but they might not have that local touch that we have because we're a little bit more tapped into the scene. At least that's what I think. We are popular in the U.S. too. I mean, there's millions of users in the U.S., millions of users in Europe, but it's mostly popular among younger people, I would say.
Okay, cool. I have to check it out, and we'll also do the link into the show notes.
Yeah, definitely.
Can we talk about your data and what I found interesting? So, besides your newsletter and everything that you share for free, is also that what is it? Some kind of Excel sheet online, and the how's it called? Billboard Hot 100 number one database. So everybody can see every kind of data. And can you tell us a little bit more about it? Because if we have listeners that would like to dive into a little bit more. And by the way, I have it open here, and there are also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other people also at the same time using it. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Feels like a community thing.
Yeah, I was really excited about that. So a little bit of backstory. Years ago, probably 8 years ago, I wasn't even working in the music industry. I just graduated college and I was working in the glorious field of economic consulting. Didn't really like the job. It gave me a lot of skills that I think became really fundamental to what I do today because you work with a lot of data and you learn to think in a certain way. But while I was working at that job, I came up with this idea that I was going to listen to every Billboard Hot 100 number one hit ever. The Hot 100 in the US is the pop chart. The chart was started in 1958. It's changed dramatically over the years, but it still exists till today. So I would listen to one song a day. I'd pick up my guitar, I'd play along with it. Told my one friend about this. He was like, "Oh, I'll do that with you." So every day we would text about the song and we would usually rate them out of 10. And I just started logging our
Hmm.
ratings in a spreadsheet because I spent my days working in Excel. But as time went on, I started to expand this spreadsheet and add other things about these songs. Oh, what label put it out? When did it top? What week did it top the charts? How many weeks was it there? Who wrote the songs? Who produced them? Where were those people from? And slowly, this spreadsheet ballooned into this monstrosity. I noticed a couple trends. I wrote something up about them because I felt compelled to. Sent it off to this professor I had in college, and he was like, "Oh, this is pretty good. You should keep at this." So over the years, I would keep listening. The spreadsheet would grow. I would notice some trends, and I would write something. And eventually, I realized like, oh, I sort of have a book on my hands here, or the makings of a book. I'd never published anything, so it took a very long time to find a publisher. But the book's coming out in November. It's called Uncharted Territory, what numbers tell us about the biggest hit songs and ourselves. And one thing that was really important to me when I was publishing the book was I was like, I want to make this data public. I want to make sure if other people want to use it, that they can use it. Because in the data world, open sourcing things is, I think it's very important. And a lot of the data sources that I used in the book were open source. It was just someone's goodwill that they put something online and said, anyone can use this. So I stuck it up online a few weeks ago and I got the reason you probably see other people in there is I've had a few prominent publications share that this data is available to everybody. So there's this very cool newsletter called Data is Plural. It's run by a data editor at the New York Times, and he shared it a couple weeks ago, or maybe just a couple days ago. And since he's done that, every time I go into the spreadsheet, there's people in there. Someone from The Economist shared it. So it's nice to see people hopefully using it, or at least looking at it, maybe finding some other trends and continuing on this story.
Can you explain what's in it besides that there are all songs? How many songs are in there?
So since August 4th, 1958, just over 1,100 songs have gotten to number one on the Billboard Hot 100. That data set goes up to January of this year. The last song I covered was Die With a Smile by Bruno Mars and Lady Gaga, because eventually I had to turn in the book, so I had to stop. Of course, there have been more number one hits since then that are not tracked in the spreadsheet. Maybe I'll add them at some point, but I needed a little break from number one hits once I sent in the manuscript in March.
Yes. When I look at the data dictionary, did you make that? Did you come up with all these elements like artist info? And what stands out for me is like artist white, artist black. I think that's interesting. So what would you do with an artist that is maybe neither white or black?
Good question. This is the problem with using binary categories, is there's, especially in race and gender, of course, there's a lot of gray area. I was mostly tracking things that I ultimately wanted to write about. So I started tracking race and gender when I was writing in the early 60s, and Motown becomes very popular in the US, and you see many more black artists at the top of the charts. There are, of course, people of tons of other races and ethnicities. For a large part of the history of the Hot 100, black and white, for lack of a better term, captures most people who are topping the charts. But I wanted to keep to these pretty broad categories because I was never going to be able to parse out every single race and gender that topped the charts. And I was also trying to focus on specific things. I went off the US Census has, the way they define race and gender is pretty broad. So I ended up following that as a guide. And for them, white means, well, you could look it up. I think it's anyone of European ancestry. And I think they also include North African ancestry and certain Middle Eastern ancestry. So it's pretty broad and coarse, but we were still able to, or I was still able to use that to parse out some really interesting trends over the years.
Can you talk about what trends you found?
Yeah, there's a lot of trends. I mean, that's what most of the book is about. Stuff related to race and gender, like I said, in the early 60s. Before the 60s, of course, there are popular black artists in the United States. But the charts, at least the top of the pop charts, are mostly dominated by white artists, and black artists would be segregated off to their own chart. Initially, it was called the Harlem Hit Parade. Then Billboard changed it to their Race Records chart, and then
to what? Race Records?
Race Records, yeah. And then they decided, basically that chart stayed the same, but they gave it a new name, R&B, or Rhythm and Blues. So something else I talk about in the book is how the genre categories that we ascribe to things often have racial undertones to them. Like, you are much less likely to see white people on an R&B chart in the same way you're much less likely to see black people on a country chart.
Yeah.
Even if they make music that were to sound like the styles that are on those charts, because we have these ideas about how people that make certain genres of music look. And that goes back, to the early 1900s, when racial segregation was much more prominent, especially in the United States. But in the 60s, you really start to see black artists cross over with white audiences. And part of what I write about is how, of course, legislation is important in changing people's opinions about race relations. But I think we often underrate the importance of the music we listen to, what the artists look like. For someone in middle America who lived in a highly segregated community, their first interaction with an African American person might be seeing Diana Ross and the Supremes on the Ed Sullivan Show, or might be seeing Marvin Gaye on some other television show. I think we underrate the influence of that. And through the 60s, you see black artists have a much more prominent role in pop music of the United States. It sort of grows over time to the point where by the 1990s, there are more black artists topping the charts than white artists.
Right. A few years ago, we had Glenn MacDonald in one of the episodes, the data alchemist of Spotify then. And I know that he tracked genre types, how he calls it. And as far as I can remember, before or when he left Spotify, there was, let's say, some kind of genre type count. I think it was more than 6,300 different genre types. Are you tracking this too? Because with Spotify, I learned from him that they are generating the genre types, not, it doesn't come from the musician that you say, I'm an indie player or I'm a crossover between country and hip hop or whatever it is. They were also looking very much into the data, how people listened, that maybe some people in, let's say, in Egypt are listening to a certain combination of different sounds, and then they gave it a name. Or that's how I understood it. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I've spoken to Glenn before, and he has a wonderful book out that's worth reading called You Have Not Heard Your Favorite Song. He's actually quoted in my book, I think, at some point, because I interviewed him a few years ago. I took a much coarser view of genre. What Spotify is doing is trying to they categorize genre based on clusters of listeners, and they're using that for algorithmic recommendations. They're using it to generate certain playlists. For my purposes, that wasn't as useful. I didn't have to be as granular with genres. I was more so looking at a high level, the genres that if you're listening to the radio or you're talking to a friend, that you're probably talking about. You're probably not talking about some micro genre that's on Spotify, even if that's what you listen to. You're probably talking about electronic music or disco music or R&B or classic rock. Something I talk about in chapter 6 of the book is how when people talk about genre, they talk about it in a few different ways, but I think we often conflate them. One is you can talk about genre by being completely agnostic to who the artist is. You can talk about it by what instruments are they using, what does it sound like? And I think that's in the abstract what people think about when they're talking about genre. But I think more often when people talk about genre, they are talking about who the artist is, when they played, who they made music with. And this is where you think about musical scenes. Southern California in the 70s, there was a soft rock music scene. And even if people in that scene, like Linda Ronstadt or the Eagles or Jackson Brown, weren't making music that sounded exactly the same, these artists were associated together. Yeah. And we started calling them as being of the same genre. And I think the third way we talk about this is more what Glenn gets at, is we categorize genres based on who is listening to them. And this is where genre gets mixed up with race and gender. It's like if you tune into your local classic rock station, you're much more likely to hear a song from some aging white guy than you are from even a white woman. I mean, classic rock it's a boys' club. Even if there's a Donna Summer song that has a searing electric guitar, like you're probably not going to hear it on your classic rock station because of what Donna Summer looks like and what the listeners of that station look like. So I find that's when I think about genre, even in a very broad sense, what I find is interesting and important is that we have all of these, all of these biases that don't actually speak to what the music itself sounds like.
Absolutely. So what I just mentioned, if you have more than 6,300 different genre types, the question is, what? How many would you know? And then we would come back to what you just mentioned, more like how we talk about music with other people. Hey, one question: the Billboard, is that radio play?
So when Billboard's goal ultimately on the Hot 100 or their pop chart is to track what is the most popular record in the United States. They have global charts now, but at the time they were just tracking in the US. And when the chart started in 1958, they were tracking record sales, radio play, and jukebox listens. So that's how long ago it was. Over time, that shifted. But for the most of the 20th century, that was really what it was. It was mostly sales and radio play. Then in the 2000s, they had digital downloads, which is the equivalent of a sale, just in a different format. And then in the 2010s, things really start to get turned on their head with streaming, where now the chart still tracks physical and digital sales, but those are a much smaller portion of the music industry. They're really tracking listening habits on Spotify. So even though the chart is the same in name, it's really tracking a different thing, because the equivalent to tracking streams on Spotify in the 50s would be tracking how many times you spun whatever 45 you bought.
Yeah.
Theoretically, you could have bought, a Frankie Valli single and never listened to it once.
Right.
Now we don't track that, and that's led to a lot of oddities in the chart and makes it different than what was going on back in the day.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that also, in the Power of Music thinking, we don't only talk about music; we talk about relations to other fields like business or whatever, or environment. But I think we can learn a lot from music data, and then make the analogy: how does this work in our organization? And I think if the listener was now thinking out loud from, hey, hang on, that's completely different data compared to Spotify or what you're tracking. And that's the same with data. It's not data. It's different. It's completely different. And even Spotify, I don't know, it's much more and more AI generated music on Spotify. I would wonder, how would you track this? Will we have in the very near future an AI generated Billboard or top 100 of, let's say, only AI generated, or I'm going too far?
I think you're getting at a problem that is brewing in music that no one has really taken a crack at solving right now. And of course, over the last year or so, there have been these new technologies. The most prominent is a company called Suno, which you can type a prompt in and it'll spit back 2 recordings.
Yeah.
I mean, despite what you think about that ethically or how it's built, it's pretty crazy that it works at all. But music services were already drowning in music before there was any AI generated music to deal with. With the advent of digital home recording, digital distribution, it's easier than ever, and it has been for the last 15 years, to create a song and upload it for anyone anywhere in the world to hear, which was not something you could do in the 1980s. If I pressed something to vinyl, I was not going to ship it to Italy. I wasn't going to ship it to Sweden. Now, with one click, someone in Indonesia and someone in Bolivia can listen to my music just as easily as my neighbor down the street. So because of that, there was already so much music. I think the last time I saw, Spotify was already getting 100,000 uploads per day from humans. And if you start counting, again, other services like YouTube and SoundCloud and Audiomack where people can upload directly, I mean, there is more music, I think, uploaded across a single week now than there was probably created across a decade in the 20th century.
Yes.
So there's a lot of music. But now imagine with these AI-generated tools, you could generate thousands of songs in minutes. I don't see any way possible unless someone somewhere decides to choke it off that streaming services would not end up having more AI generated music than human generated music, just because it is so easy to generate songs with artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And there's no limitation. If you have a DistroKid account, or if you have an account with a distributor and you're paying $20 a year for unlimited uploads, why not upload your 100,000 songs and hope one pops off and you make back your $20? I think someone's gonna have to deal with this somewhere. I mean, maybe Spotify ultimately doesn't care what their server costs are. For a smaller streaming service like Audiomack, if we start getting flooded with AI, I could see us being like, okay, we're not going to pay the web hosting bill for your million AI generated tracks. I don't know. We haven't really dealt with that yet. But someone somewhere is probably going to have to choke this off in some way, maybe limiting the number of uploads you could do per day, making it more expensive. I'm not sure. Or streaming services could try to detect it and just be like, we're not accepting this. I think that's hard. The streaming service I've seen do the most with that is Deezer, which is a French streaming service that's I think it's pretty popular across Europe.
Yeah, French. Yeah, yes, you mentioned.
I think they're trying to choke it off a little bit, and they've been saying like such crazy stats like 70% of uploads we're seeing are AI. So like that's obviously untenable and probably not good if that continues. But I don't know how. Someone's going to have to decide to stop it at some point, and it'll probably be you'd have to stop it at the distribution point, is my thought.
Yeah. And that's something we can learn from music, because if you can tackle that problem, then you can also tackle all the other problems where AI is used. So that's nice with analogy. So I think that's why the music industry, or the music business is so interesting, that it often is in the last decades digitally very some kind of forerunner in technology, but in the way how they adapt it, they are behind, because in the year 2000, I think the top sellers were CD, but you know much more about this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Will Page, who used to be the chief economist at Spotify, I think he said this to me once, or he was quoting someone, I'm not sure, about how, exactly to your point, that music often deals with disruption before a lot of other industries. Music went digital long before movies went digital. I mean, people were ripping music offline, and part of it is music files are just smaller. So it's easier for the MP3 revolution to take over music before it takes over movies, where it's a 2 hour artistic experience with image and sound, on dial-up connections in the 1990s. That's not going to fly, but maybe you can download, your 3-minute Christina Aguilera song. So I think that's a very apt observation. And I think that's why it's important to look what the music industry is dealing with, because they often have to figure it out before everybody else. And we've seen that over the last 20 years. But I think, and this is something I write about in the book, is we've really seen it over the last 150 years from the time recorded music was created. I mean, in very broad strokes, the story of recorded music, or the story of the music industry, is one where there's a push and pull between technology and artists. And our debates today are about, is digital or analog sound better? But if you go back, it was, is electric or acoustic recording better? Is spinning your 45 at different speeds better or more accurate than one or the other? Is mono or stereo better? I mean, we have the same debates dressed up differently again and again. And I think music does forerun those debates in a lot of other arenas.
So to finish up, maybe just something more about your book. So why should we buy the book? Why do we need this if we are listening now to The Power of Music Thinking?
Good question. So I think the book is interesting for multiple reasons, or will appeal to people for multiple reasons. One, I think the approach is very novel. Not many people have taken a data-centric approach to the history of popular music. And this approach allows us to investigate the common stories that we hear about music. This is something that I think is really helpful with data, and there are limitations, but you could say, oh, rock music got softer in the 70s. Okay, you could, there's a lot of people have written about that. You can measure certain things about the loudness or the quietness of music, and you can see if that actually holds up to statistical scrutiny. And that's what I do throughout the book. But at the same time, I try to make it very accessible. I'm not writing for an academic audience. I'm writing for a person who just likes to turn on the pop radio station and listen. So I think the way this becomes accessible is because I'm writing about the most popular songs of all time. And I'm writing in a way that I'm trying to spark debate. I'm trying to make you think. And at the end of every chapter, actually, I list in me and the other people that were listening's opinion, the 3 best and worst songs of each era, which is a very, throw all the statistics and numbers out the window. It's just a fun exercise in the ways that people actually talk and think about music. We like to argue about what's good and what's bad. And this was a reminder as I was going through this, that in every era, there's good and bad songs. And ultimately, why we write about music and why we listen to music is so we can share it with other people. So I'm hoping to spark conversation, spark debate, make you think about the songs you've heard a million times differently. And I think the book does that pretty well.
So a spark to talk about music and talk about how you listen together to music. So not everybody with their headphone, but maybe also just listening sessions where you share or enjoy all the music.
Yeah, I mean, people do a lot of music listening alone these days. As you're saying, everyone's got their headphones they could pop on while they're walking around. But music is ultimately a very social art, and you see that historically is, entertainment at home in the 1800s was people getting around the piano and singing. Music is a social thing going back thousands of years, and I think it's important for us to remember that. And that's something Mark Richardson, he wrote a little blurb on the back of the book. Mark used to be the editor-in-chief of Pitchfork, and now he's a critic at the Wall Street Journal. And he said the book was a good reminder for him that the thing that's most enjoyable about music is sitting around and talking about it and listening to it with other people. So I'm hoping that other people get that out of the book too.
Chris, thank you very much. I think that rounds it up very perfectly. To listen more together to music. Thank you very much for all your insights and being on the Power of Music Thinking.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate this because listening is one of the top leadership skills, and I feel honored about this. It is my mission to find, create, and share inspirations for meaningful collaboration based on music analogies. If you want to support this, please subscribe to the podcast, give us a rating, or write a review on iTunes or Spotify. And more inspirations can be found on musicthinking.com. We have a blog, and you can download the Music Thinking Framework. And finally, I would love to hear your feedback. And if you need help with a business challenge, please reach out to me via email, podcast@musicthinking.com.